Hello. This is What If Pirate King Luffy Went Back in Time. Please like and subscribe to my channel. Next part is coming soon. All around him, the world spun. He was dizzy and the only thing he could make out were the dark greens and browns of what he suspected were trees. Problem was, he didn't get much time to think on what was occurring or why he was so lightheaded because after only a few moments of frantically trying and failing to both run in a straight line and get a grip on reality, the world took a nosedive and faded around him. The next thing he knew, all had once again turned to darkness. "Boy," a voice called out. It sounded like a kid, but Luffy couldn't respond. After all, he could only just barely hear the voice even a little, and all his other functions felt like they had been run through a trash compactor. "Boy." The voice repeated, a little louder this time. Now Luffy could feel someone beginning to shake him, but he still couldn't obtain the power to really move, much less properly react to the child. Finally, Luffy blinked a few times. It was a start. "Oh, the kid shouted, shaking Luffy violently. His vision finally cleared and his body seemed to be functioning, at least in the most basic sense, again. He slowly sat up, rubbing his head to help ease the raging headache that had sprung up in the last few seconds. "Oh, you woke up. That's good." Luffy turned slightly to find the source of the voice and was greeted by the sight of a little kid sitting cross-legged and staring intently at him, mostly with wonder, but also a hint of annoyance. With messy black hair and big black eyes, the kid looked a bit similar to himself if he were about 20 years younger. Luffy's half-lidded eyes slowly opened and he swirled his head around unsteadily to take in his surroundings. He was in a forest and it seemed slightly familiar, but he couldn't quite place it exactly. "Hey kid, do you know where we are?" Luffy questioned, his voice cracking at the words. It felt like he hadn't spoken for weeks and his voice was dry as sandpaper. "You don't know where you are?" The kid asked incredulously, "But you're sitting here. That means you must have come here. Or are you just an idiot or something?" "No, I am not an idiot," Luffy huffed, slightly ticked off at the comment. Plenty of people had said the same thing, but at least most of them had some sort of brains. This, on the other hand, was a 6-year-old. "I was just on my ship, then bam, I pass out and next thing I know I'm here, being called an idiot by you." The kid blinked, then smiled, "Shush, you're weird, old man." "Boy, who are you calling an old man?" "I'm 23. Luffy sighed, "And you still haven't answered my question." "Oh yeah, you're right, outside Foosha village, in the forest." Luffy's eyes widened and he rushed over to the kid as fast as his aching limbs would take him. He grabbed the boy's shoulders and shook him as he spoke, or more accurately flipped out, and the gibberish noises he made just happened to vaguely sound like words. "Wait, what? No. Not possible. The one in East Blue. By Goa. Are you sure? No. It's impossible. No. Can't be. That's dumb. But, what? No. Are you completely positive?" Now the kid, after getting over the initial shock of the shaking and the yelling, angrily shouted back, "Yeah, I'm sure. I'm not some idiot like you who doesn't remember where they are. I've lived here my whole life, I think I'd know if I was wrong." The kid crossed his arms and huffed. Luffy let go of the kid and noticed his knuckles had turned white. Taking a deep breath, he looked into the boy's eyes. Alright, I'm sorry for not believing you. It's just that the last thing I remember, I was over on the other side of the ocean and I was confused, that's all. It's a long distance to travel without knowing you traveled it. So sorry again." The boy nodded slowly, his features softening. Luffy tried for a smile. "So kid, what's your name? And if you live over in Foosha, why are you out here in the forest? There's some dangerous animals out here for a squirt like you." "Oh, my gramps throws me out here whenever he's around, so I know I'm strong enough to handle myself. He said it was training so I'd become a strong marine like him, but I don't want to be a dumb all marine." The kid crossed his arms and puffed his cheeks. "I'm gonna be a pirate." Luffy quirked an eyebrow. "You know, I had a grandpa who used to do stuff like that to me too." Luffy chuckled to himself in remembrance. "He'd tie me to balloons and let them slowly pop while I was up in the air and throw me in pits of crocodiles whenever he came over to see me and he gave me these terrifying punches." Luffy trailed off for a moment. Thinking about all the pain Garp had put him through in these woods for the sake of training. He glanced over and snapped back into reality upon seeing the little kid staring at him. "Good times. And kid, you still haven't told me your name." "Right. Well, I'm Monkey D. Luffy." The kid made a huge grin, pointing his thumb at himself proudly. That caught Luffy off guard. Claiming to be the Pirate King was, well, really dumb. If the Marines even heard a wig of someone even pretending to be himself, they could be looking at lifetime imprisonment. Still, the kid was young and dumb, so Luffy decided to be calm about it. He looked intently at the kid, but he didn't really look like he was putting on an act. But maybe there were two people with Usopp's lying ability in this world. But what would the kid do if he found out that he was talking to the real Monkey D. Luffy? The thought made Luffy laugh inwardly. Luffy shook his head. "No, really. What's your name? I'd like to know. I like you, kid, but I don't really like most liars." This seemed to piss the kid off again. "I'm not lying, you idiot. Why would I lie about my own name? Trying to bust a lie, Luffy said, okay fine, your name is Monkey D. Luffy. So then who's your gramps? How's he doing? The kid seemed a bit confused as to what his grandpa had to do with anything, but complied in answering. My gramps' name is Garp, but I don't really know how he is. He doesn't come by too much, and when he does, all he does is yell at me about how I'm gonna be a great marine. It's stupid. The kid sighed and sat down, and then he punches me all the time with his fist of love for wanting to be a pirate, he's so mean, the kid trailed off, looking slightly put out, but then brightened up a moment later. But that's alright. I've got Makino. She's really nice and gives me food all the time. Shishy. The kid smiled brightly. Luffy looked at the kid in shock. Whatever answer he expected, it was definitely not that. Luffy ended up just sitting there, floundering a bit. How? He kept repeating in his head. The Pirate King pulled himself out of his thoughts and faced the smiling boy. Hey, Luffy, how old are you? Oh, I'm 6. The kid lifted up 4 fingers as he said 5. Luffy just smiled and ignored the opposing numbers. Great. That is just great. What a fantastic age. Luffy nodded as he spoke, more than strictly necessary. Well Luffy, if that's true, I have a theory. And it's very important that I tell you this theory, but you'll have to keep it a secret to everyone, even Makino. Do you understand? The boy tilted his head to the side, what's a theory? It's like I guess that I thought of that I think is true. Oh, okay. I'll keep your theory a secret. Luffy nodded. Okay, that's good, thank you. So I'm not sure how to say this, but I'm pretty sure I traveled back to 17 years in the past. My name is Monkey D. Luffy, and I believe you are a past version of me as a child. I know that's a lot to think about, but whether or not you choose to believe me, you cannot tell a soul about this. Do you understand? Luffy paused, actually, I guess I was sure how to say that. Cool. The boy sat there for a second with his face scrunched, pondering what Luffy had just claimed. After a moment, a wide grin crept onto the boy's face, that's so awesome. I look so cool in the future. Are you, am I strong? Do I get to have awesome adventures? What do I do? Wait, don't answer that, I want to find out for myself. But still, what are? As the younger Luffy rattled off question after question, the elder slowly stopped listening, caught up in his own thoughts of how what had happened was even possible. Not that he'd know, he was never very smart with science and technology and most other things. Luffy then realized his counterpart was still rambling. I stronger than Gramps? Am I? Boy, please stop asking questions. The only thing even mildly important now is that as of right now, I am 23 years old. Later, when we're all settled down, we can talk about some future stuff, alright. The younger Luffy nodded, still showing off his huge grin, okay, good. Now, let's go back to the village and see Makino. I feel completely disgusting and need a bath, and you look like you could probably use one yourself. Does that sound alright with you? The younger Luffy nodded again. This is so cool. I can't wait for you to meet Makino. She's so nice and cool, and she gives me all sorts of meat. She's gonna love you. The Pirate King just nodded along, not commenting on the fact that he already knew Makino. Well, what are we waiting around here for? Let's go. Come on. The younger shouted excitedly whilst tugging his older self's shirt. Sounds good to me. Let's G. Luffy was cut off as a sounding growl came barreling through the forest with the soar steadily getting closer. At the growl, the younger stiffened and panicked, we've gotta get out of here. The bear's coming. It's one of the strongest things in this forest. It can even fight with the tiger. It's definitely gonna kill us if we don't run. We got. Stop. Luffy put a hand over the 6-year-old's mouth and put a finger to his own mouth, grinning. I am strong, Luffy. We are strong. You just have to trust me. Besides, you'd never outrun that thing. Not if you understand, cause I want to remove my hand, but I don't want to hear your scaredy voice anymore. The younger Luffy nodded slowly, fear still evident in his big black eyes. Good. The older removed his hand from the boy's face and turned towards the giant black bear, which was just coming into view from behind the thicket of trees. The beast towered over the two Luffys in equal measures, though the pair's reactions differed greatly. The younger had fallen to the ground upon seeing the bear and had begun slowly crawling backwards in hopes of getting away unnoticed, while the older stood to face it, completely relaxed, though a slight frown tugged at the captain's lips. Boy, you stupid bear. What do you think you're doing, scaring Luffy like that? The elder snapped, gesturing to the still cowering Luffy, I have half a mind to beat the snot out of you right now just for that, but I'm tired, so I'll let you off easy just this time. So? What are you waiting for, big guy? Come at me. The bear looked down at Luffy and snarled. It raised its paw, readying for an attack. Tut tut. Way too slow. The older Luffy shrugged, then glared at the bear and released a relatively weak blast of Conqueror's Haki, forcing the bear's eyes to roll back behind its head as it limply fell to the side, unconscious. The elder didn't pay the bear much mind as he turned to his younger self, holding out a hand, come on, Luffy. Let's get out of here. The younger simply stared dumbly, glancing at the bear and then at the man claiming to be his future self. Slowly, slouched face turned over to Aki. It's pretty cool to know. The older smiled and pulled his younger self onto his back in a piggyback position. So which way is Foosha? There. The boy said, pointing a little to the right. Diligently, Luffy turned that way and began walking straight. For the next few minutes, the pair walked in silence, the older thinking about the insanity that had gone on that day and when the next meal was. Finally, he broke the silence. Hey Luffy, you know, we should find a new name for me to go by. It would be pretty confusing to have people calling both of us Luffy. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But what should we call you? The young Luffy thought about it for a moment, resting his hand against his chin. As he thought, his face slowly contorted to that of a constipated man. Oh, the pain of thinking. Don't hurt yourself, Luffy. The elder chuckled. It's just a name. I'm sure you can think of a good one. Don't stress it. You say that, but I don't want myself to have a stupid idiot name. I want it to be really cool and stuff, but it's so hard to think of cool names cause Luffy's already taken. The elder thought about that for a moment. He did have a point there. Luffy was a pretty cool name and he couldn't just have people call him something dumb like Usopp. That would be a shame. Out in Syrup Village, a young boy with a long nose sneezed. Is someone making fun of my name? I, the great Captain Usopp, and my 8,000 followers love my cool name. Who would even think of making fun of it? The older Luffy smiled. Hey Luffy, how does Delta sound to you? Is that a good enough name for your future self? Luffy looked down at his new idol in awe. Wow, can I do everything in the future? Cause so far, I can take down bears without even touching them and I can think of the best names in the world. Young Luffy looked up into the sky. I don't even know how you could be cooler. In the future, I'm pretty amazing. Well, that's that problem settled. Luffy, I am no longer Luffy, I am Delta. That is me. I am as of now, your new older brother, Monkey D. Delta. Luffy affirmed, still walking. Alright, Delta. Luffy grinned and jumped off Delta's back and began running ahead. Last one to Makino's gets less meat than the other. Shishi. What? No. Get back here. I'm older so I need the meat. Do you even know where you're going? Hey. Delta chased after Luffy, who was already slowing down from exhaustion. Let it be known that 5-year-olds could not run very far without getting tired. Artie's bar. Delta thought to himself. Night was now falling as the pair began their descent down the grassy hill towards the cozy wooden building. It looked closed for the night and all the lights were out, save one at the front door, though the silence was short-lived as an excited Luffy ran into the bar, yelling about meat and such. Delta sauntered in after him, waiting near the door to be introduced to Makino. Luffy had all but run into the green-haired woman, wrapping his arms around her in a tight hug. Hey Makino. Luffy greeted happily. Makino smiled. Well hello Luffy. You seem pretty excited today. What's the occasion? Oh right. Luffy grabbed Makino's hand and walked her towards the front door. Makino, meet Delta. He's my brother. Makino looked up from Luffy to see a fairly handsome smiling man walking towards her. He wore black pants and a red cardigan which had been left unbuttoned to expose his toned abs and large X-shaped scar covering his chest. Over the cardigan he wore a black coat reaching just above the floor with dark red trimmed edges. Underneath his left eye was a large scar and atop the man's head was a worn straw hat with a red ribbon around it covering most of his messy black hair. The hat actually looked strangely familiar but she chose to ignore it for the time being. Delta took her hand in his and shook it. Hello Miss Makino. My name is Delta and as Luffy already mentioned, I am Luffy's older brother. What? Makino's eyes widened slightly and looked at him with a mix of surprise and skepticism. I never heard about Luffy having a brother. Well that may be because I've been out at sea for the past 7 years. Luffy had not even been born the last time I could have been able to be contacted. Plus, Garp has never met or heard of me. I was unknown to all besides our father, who I'm sure you know is a very secretive man. Delta smiled knowingly. Beyond Delta is really cool, Makino. Luffy exclaimed, looking up at her, excitement evident in his eyes. He took down this giant bear in the forest without even touching it. It was amazing. That is impressive, Luffy. Your brother seems very strong and I'm glad you like him. She smiled, picking up Luffy, but right now you need a bath. She looked back at Delta, who noticed that behind her wonderful smile lay a small air of doubt and a bit of distrust. It hurt Delta that she didn't trust him, but it made sense. Some random unknown claiming to be the secret brother of Luffy did seem a bit odd. Maybe I should have thought of a better story. Well, what's done is done. But Makino, Luffy whined, still in her arms, I want food. You'll have dinner after your bath. Oh and Delta, you can use the baths too if you wish. Feel free to stay the night as well. Makino turned towards the stairs, Luffy moaning the whole time about how he needed his meat to be super strong. Delta walked up the stairs shortly after them with a small sigh. He really didn't want to have to wait 11 whole years to see his nakama again. And even then, they won't be the same as he knew them. Even though he loved Foosha and Dayton and Makino and Ace. He had forgotten. Ace was on the island. Breathing. Alive. That cheered Delta up quite a bit. And if he couldn't find a way to go back to the future, which was probable because he didn't have the faintest clue of where to start, then he was going to make this life different. He was already stronger and older and farther back in time than when he first became a pirate and already had an okay idea of what the future held. Yes, he wasn't just going to let life play out exactly that same way. Cause who wants to repeat what they've already done? That would just be super lame. Luffy, please stop, Delta mumbled with an exasperated sigh, his head resting on the bar between his arms. Luffy. Luffy, come on. Luffy, stop. This is too much. Luffy. But what's wrong with poking? Luffy asked, poking's never hurt anyone before. Well, then tell that to CP9. Delta thought, they obviously didn't get the memo. And besides, Luffy continued, this is your own fault, really. Please, Delta scoffed as he sat up. I'm not irritated because I'm afraid of getting hurt. It's about you putting me through this mental torment with more obnoxiousity than I have ever remembered facing. You've been poking for 5 minutes. 5 whole minutes. This, Delta gestured to the poking, takes actual effort to accomplish. You need to truly have the drive to be annoying if you poke someone for that long. That is true willpower. Delta looked off into the distance solemnly, true, infuriating willpower. It was 10 minutes ago when the duo sat beside each other at the stools of Party's bar in a calming hush when Luffy began spouting out questions ascertaining to future events. They'd just finished just as Makino disappeared behind the large wooden door leading to the kitchen, pile of dishes in tow, the utter downpour of inquiries came tumbling out of the young boy's mouth. Some actually held some real value, but the vast majority of his questions seemed to be a bunch of 6-year-old nonsense. Asking if people still pooped in the future was one of Delta's favorites from the latter category. But Delta was still adamant on keeping tight-lipped to any and all queries, important or no. This in turn led to the aforementioned poking. Come on, Luffy whined, Makino'll be back any minute now and then we'll have to be quiet. Luffy puffed his cheeks and pouted, and I thought you were cool. Maybe you are just some idiot. Now that seemed to get Delta's attention, hey. Like hell I'm an idiot. He huffed, fine, just to show how cool I really am, I'll answer one question about anything future why. But that's it. Got it. Instantly grinning, Luffy nodded happily, yep. But that also means you'll have to stop poking me. Luffy nodded again, excited as ever, and quickly ceased with the poking. Oh, and also you aren't allowed to poke at me ever again. Sound fair? I can do that. Luffy hopped up on his stool while his grin turned to a rather intense look directed at Delta. To finish the look, Luffy pointed at Delta rather intensely as well. Because I only have one question and you made me wait so long, I have to make this good. So I thought of the one thing I really wanted to know most, but you can't laugh at me, K. Alright, shoot. Delta looked at Luffy with half-lidded eyes to hide the curiosity as to what his younger self would want to know about his own future. Well, what I want to know is, Luffy faltered slightly as he looked away nervously, do I get friends? Delta's eyes flit open. What do you mean? Of course you get friends. Honestly, you get the most awesome friends in existence. He gently tugged on Luffy's chin and forced the boy's head to face his own as he stared into the despondent kid's eyes. Why would that be your question? I mean, it's obvious isn't it? We're pretty great, so by basic logic, we'd also have pretty great friends. Luffy tried to look sullenly at the floor, but Delta's hand kept it firmly in place. Well, I have Makino and Wood Slap and the people who sometimes come here and talk to me during lunch and stuff, but, well, I don't really have any real friends. Delta had almost forgotten the feeling of being without others considering how long ago it had since he was the age of Luffy, but when he heard the boy talking like that, it brought a rush of memories he really didn't want to handle right then. Delta sternly said, we, in the future, get the most precious friends I and you could ever ask for. Honestly, even though we're awesome and all, we really don't deserve them. He grinned, I don't know why they put up with us if I'm telling the truth. I'm thinking about them right now and I miss the hell out of them. So shut up with the sadness and come here. Delta held his arms out in the come hug me, you look like you need it sort of way, which Luffy happily accepted. The back door creaked open, revealing a slightly wet Makino, whom the two chose to ignore in favor of keeping the wonderful hug they were sharing. Oh, did I miss something? I didn't think I was gone all that long, Makino smiled. Delta was the first to respond, though the manly embrace held strong, just a bit of brotherly bonding, you know how it is. Right Lou? He was answered with a soft snore escaping the boy still wrapped tightly around him. Well it seems Luffy here had quite a big day. Makino commented, his room is the first door on the left and yours would be the next door down. If you could bring Luffy up there, then you can get some rest yourself. Delta smiled, and again, thank you for letting me stay here Makino. I really don't mean to be a bother, I'll find a place to stay on my own soon enough. Oh don't worry yourself too much, Delta. Luffy seems to really like you, and any brother of Luffy is welcome to stay here. Makino smiled and walked off to the kitchen. Oh Makino, still such a kind soul. Delta climbed up the staircase to the upstairs, earning slight creaks with each step up until he reached Luffy's bed. There, he laid the boy down gingerly and tucked him in. He tiptoed out of the room and gently closed the door behind him as to not wake Luffy. Now, when Delta turned around, he did not expect to see much. And if he were to be expecting something, it'd probably be something like a wall, because that makes sense. Walls usually are on the sides of buildings, after all. Logic. Now, what he was not expecting was for Makino, one of the sweetest people he'd ever known and the closest thing to a mother he'd ever had, to be standing right behind him, scowling and brandishing a particularly large butcher knife, with the edge, the sharp one, held very, very close to the rubber man's throat. No. On the list of things Delta was expecting, this was very near the bottom, hovering right below the Eggman of Big Mom's crew crouching behind him and just a little above Whitebeard in a dress. So yes, suffice it to say, seeing Makino like that was very surprising to say the least. Don't speak. Makino commanded coldly, come with me now. We're going downstairs. Wouldn't want to wake Luffy up, your beloved little brother. Delta gulped, alright, I am with you all the way. And I'll be quiet. You're right, we wouldn't want to wake Luffy. Damn, Makino can be scary. Wait, but aren't I supposed to be the strongest man alive? No, scratch that, it doesn't matter how strong you are, this Makino is a true terror only found in the lowest depths of hell. Delta took the lead down the stairs with Makino trailing close behind, holding the knife steady against the time traveler's back. No matter how scary Delta found Makino to be, he knew he could not lose his cool at a time like this. Hey, can you not do that please? You're cutting my jacket with that scare tactic of yours. And see, I really like this jacket. In response, Makino pushed the knife into his back a little harder. Delta sighed. Now I have to assume that you have a reason for sticking a knife on me, right? You don't really seem to be the type to do this just for the hell of it. He took a seat at one of the tables and faced Makino, who stood opposite him, knife still raised in what was supposed to be a threatening manner. Delta continued, so what would it be? Is this a questioning, or are you just gonna attempt a murder? Personally I. Shut it. Makino commanded icily. Who are you? Why are you here? What do you want with Luffy? He's just a simple boy who I promise has done nothing wrong. Just go. I don't know your reason for getting closer to Luffy, but I'll warn you, his grandpa is the famous Garp the Fist, and I doubt he would take kindly to some pervert trying something on his only grandson. Delta sat there for a moment, collecting his thoughts. Then something dawned on him, wait, did she just call me a pervert? Me? No, that's not right. I am definitely not a pervert. Maybe I just heard wrong. I should ask, just to make sure. Delta tilted his head, looking quite puzzled. Sorry, I'll get to all that other stuff in a sec, but did you just call me a pervert? Because I can assure you, I am no pervert. He nodded self-assuredly. Sure, he knew quite a few perverts, there were 3 just on his crew, but he was fairly certain he was no pervert. But that just seemed to make Makino glare harder. Okay then, well, I guess we can just go over the me not being a perv thing later, alright. Delta twiddled his thumbs and suddenly became very interested in the wall on the other side of the room. Makino snarled, stop messing around with me. Do you think this is some sort of joke? And if you think I won't use this, she stabbed the knife around a little, then you'll be sorely mistaken. Now start talking. Delta decided then and there he'd had just about enough of this side of Makino. It was too unsettling. He stood up abruptly, grabbed a blade and crushed it within his hand, which he'd coated in a light layer of armament hockey. Then he said, in the most serious tone he could pull off, Makino, sorry, but you are the one that is mistaken. My name is Delta, and though you're right that I told a small lie about being Luffy's brother by blood, I still love the kid like he was one. Now I have no reason to explain why to you, his face softened slightly, but I honestly mean Luffy no harm whatsoever. Please, I'm begging you, just give me a chance. Makino just stared as he talked. She just didn't really know how to react. He didn't seem like a particularly bad guy, but maybe he was just a good liar, but then again, he snapped the steel knife like a twig, and unless Luffy was lying, he knew how to use Conqueror's Haki, which meant he was definitely strong. Which meant he could probably forcefully take Luffy pretty easily if he really wanted to so. And why should I trust anything you say? Makino asked, some of her bravado from earlier fading, I mean you could just be a criminal who happens to also be a good liar. The two do mix fairly well after all. How could you expect me to trust you? She crossed her arms, still holding the snapped knife. Delta thought about that for a moment, well you do have a point there, and you don't know me well enough to know I can't lie for crap, so I guess that wouldn't really work as an excuse. It seems we are at a bit of an impasse. This sure is a toy. Delta trailed off, racking his brain for a way to make Makino trust him, other than telling the truth, though the very idea of Makino distrusting him left a sour taste in his mouth and almost made him compelled to tell her his secret. Well I have an idea, Makino said, smirking a little, as you either already know or just learned from me, Monkey D. Garp is Luffy's grandfather and I trust him completely. He is also a pretty good judge of character. He will be coming to the island to check up on Luffy in 1 month, and when he does I will pass you off to him. Either way he decides concerning you, I will be on board. And during this next month, you are not allowed to leave the village or talk to Luffy without me present and without my express permission. Do we have a deal? Deal? Delta stated simply and then looked at her pleadingly, and though you don't completely believe me, I need you to know this, I would put Luffy's life above mine any day of the week, no questions asked. And about the whole sleeping situation, am I still allowed to stay in the room you gave me in earlier? Or should I sleep outside? No, sleep inside. I'll be able to keep a closer eye on you from inside the house. Makino answered, then added tentatively, and I'd like you to know one thing. I want to believe you. I really do. My gut says to, but I can't just put Luffy's life in possible danger from a gut feeling. And if you truly care for Luffy the way you say, you'll understand. I'm sorry. And with that, Makino set down the broken knife and walked upstairs, presumably to get some rest as well. Delta's heart jumped. That was the Makino he knew. Delta walked up to his room, tiptoed past Luffy's door, and dived into his borrowed bed. But the day he'd been having, it was not hard for the future Pirate King, codename Delta, to drift off to sleep. 00000. Delta opened his eyes slowly and rubbed the morning gunk out of his eyes in a less than fluid motion. So it looks like I'm still here. He thought, guess the I'm just having a very vivid dream theory was wrong. Drat. The Pirate King slowly forced himself out of his very comfortable bed and groggily swayed around, slowly progressing towards the door's general direction. When Delta finally passed the daily morning challenge of moving and got a grip on the door's handle, he very carefully opened it, not wanting to wake anyone who might still be sleeping, and made his way to the bathroom to freshen up. Oh yes, I sure am freshened, Delta said to himself as he walked out from the bathroom and towards the downstairs. Wait just a minute, Makino might be down there, and if she is, that could be awkward. I guess I'll have to go stealth. Delta crept towards the stairs, making sure to be as silent as possible. He pushed himself against the wall to the right of the staircase and carefully, oh so carefully, peeked out in order to search for any sign of the green-haired woman. Sneaky, sneaky, I got this, I got this, I got this, I got. Oh hey Delta. Luffy laughed, what are you doing? The boy was just sitting there, staring right at him from across the room. Damn. Operation Stealth is a no-go. Abort. Abort. Delta jumped from his hiding spot and casually started walking towards Luffy. Oh, nothing much, just coming down the stairs completely normal-like. Yep, there were absolutely no hidden stealth tactics I was using that I learned from a real ninja. Nope. None of what I just said happened. You're weird. Was all Luffy said. His eyes then traveled over Delta's shoulders and he waved, oh hi Makino. Can you get me breakfast? I'm starving. Slowly, like in a horror movie, Delta looked over his shoulder, wide-eyed, to see Makino walking towards the pair, smiling as usual. Delta gulped. As she passed by him towards Luffy, she whispered, giggling slightly, wow you really are a terrible liar. It almost makes me want to believe you. Wah hey. Delta huffed. Sure it's okay when he's the one pointing out his one teensy flaw, but when other people said it, it was just wrong. He didn't get to voice his opinions on the matter because Luffy began yelling about all the possible meats you could have for breakfast. It was a significantly larger assortment than the average person would classify as breakfast meat. After breakfast, which entailed some awkward small talk with Makino on Delta's part and quite a bit of food stealing, a rather mundane day began, mostly because for the whole day Makino watched Delta like a hawk and he didn't want to arouse any sort of suspicion on the first day of their little truce. For the most part Delta stayed in the bar, walking around and talking to any and all patrons, making idle chit-chat as a ways to get over his boredom and for the side goal of having the people of Foosha to get to know him. And though the day went by pretty smoothly, one pest known as Luffy kept trying to lead Delta away from Makino so that he could ask some more future questions, but every time in Luffy's 20+ attempts at sneaking off with Delta, Makino always caught him red-handed. And every time Luffy seemed completely dumbfounded as to how he'd been found out, even though they were in a single room with only one exit. If she hadn't caught them, Delta may have been a little worried for her health. Luckily, she never seemed to blame Delta and his possible criminalistic motives on the escape attempts, which he was grateful for. 000. As night reared its head around once again, Delta lay back in his bed and smiled up at the ceiling. For him the day, though rather dull, was a nice change of pace for him. As the Pirate King, everyone seemed to know his face, thus he didn't end up having many conversations with strangers due to every person's totally unreasonable fear of the title Pirate King. Crash. A loud noise came from downstairs. Delta jumped out of his bed with a start and bounded for the door at lightning speeds, which in his case was actually quite literal. Something loud and probably bad had happened downstairs and Delta was going to help in any way he could. Anything really to gain some good guy points with Makino. Not that that was the whole reason. Delta was a good person. When he got downstairs though, he was greeted with a picture of some ugly-ass man grinning madly at Makino while yelling in a disgustingly southern accent for her to give him all her cash. Sure, the boy gets it. In one of his beefy arms, he held a revolver, which was being pointed at Luffy's head, who was being held tightly in the other meaty fist. One of the tables was broken, and shattered glass littered the floor, no doubt where the noise had come from earlier. Overall, it looked like a pretty basic mugging, though one thing about the whole scene was bugging Delta. He didn't remember this ever happening when he was a kid. Then something clicked. The bear. In this world, he had attacked the bear, which had probably scared off this gross man in the last world. And that brought on a whole slew of implications about Delta's time travel that he did not want to think about. "Hey, the hell do you think you're doing?" Delta called out, nonchalantly walking down the stairs. "What you're doing right there is not very good thing to do, so I'm just going to have to ask you to leave." Makino looked over at Delta, worry painted over her chocolate eyes, while the idiot with the gun just laughed. "Oh, is tha right? Well sorry, boo, why shy? Sides, once I g the cash, I might just take the kid. I kinda like him. He's quite a pretty one, ain't he?" He squeezed Luffy harder, probably to accentuate his point about the boy's prettiness, and Luffy was forced to cough from the increased pressure. This didn't faze Delta, though. He turned to Makino and pointed at the man and said very sternly, "Makino, that is a pervert. See the difference between him and me? Pervert," he nodded to the man, "not pervert," he pointed to himself. "Pervert, not pervert. I feel there is a very apparent difference." "Are you serious?" Makino cried, close to tears. "He's going to kill Luffy and you're on about that? Really?" "Oh what? No, don't worry, he's not gonna kill Luffy, promise." Suddenly Delta was no longer standing by the stairs, but was on the other side of the room with the man on the ground, helpless under the weight of Delta's foot. The man's gun, now in Delta's hands, was placed firmly against the perv's sweaty forehead. Instead of in the creep's arms, Luffy was sitting at a table next to Makino unharmed. After getting over the fear of dying he'd just experienced, which he did surprisingly quickly, the boy grinned with stars once again in his eyes. "See Makino, he's amazing." Delta grinned up at him and then turned to Makino, "So what do you want me to do with this freak show?" Makino, who was just getting over the shock of what had just occurred, answered, "Just knock him out and put him in the forest please. I sincerely doubt he'll try anything again after what just happened." How merciful. Delta looked down at the cowering man and struck him across the head with the butt of the gun, effectively knocking him out. He threw the man over his shoulder and looked over at Makino again. He stated seriously, "I'm sorry, but I just can't put him in the forest for you." "What? Why?" both Makino and Luffy asked. "By request of Makino, I am not to leave the village borders for the next month, and the forest is outside of the borders, so Delta grinned, to complete your request, you will have to lift my current village arrest." Makino sighed and shook her head as a sign of annoyance, but Delta could see her smile plain as day. "Fine, I will temporarily lift your ban to throw this man out of here. But no funny business, got it?" "Yeah, I got it." Delta answered coolly, though he couldn't hide his grin very well either. 00000. Roughly 5 minutes later. Delta walked back into the bar after placing the man some random place deep in the forest and saw Luffy eating some after trauma meat to get over the man's breaking. "Boy, Luffy, you alright?" Delta asked, pulling up a seat next to the boy. "That must have been pretty scary, huh?" "The chomp was, but then bite when you showed eat up, I swallow knew I was safe." Luffy grinned and continued eating. "That's nice to hear, but now I realize I'm not supposed to be talking to you right now," Delta said, getting up. "Why not?" "Makino has told me that for the next month I'm not supposed to talk to you without being in her presence. It was a little deal we made last night after you went off to bed." Delta shrugged, just as Makino walked in from the back, "but it's fine, because speak of the devil, she's back. Seems we're good, then." "Boy, Makino," Luffy called, "why can't Delta talk to me alone? That seems weird." Makino shot an accusing glance at Delta, who shrugged it off. You see," Makino began, but was quickly cut off. "Well, Lou, she doesn't trust me much." Delta answered, while Makino proceeded to direct a steady glare at him. "But it does make sense, because I am a stranger and all who just kind of showed up saying I was your older brother. You have to admit, it does sound strange." Luffy looked at him, perplexed, "But you're not a stranger. You told me you were Delta's hand quickly covered his mouth. "Luffy," Delta whispered hastily, "remember we weren't going to talk about that. Remember how I said that was a secret?" "Oh, yeah. You weren't going to talk about what?" "What was Luffy going to say?" Makino asked. "Nothing," the pair responded quickly, whistling and looking at either side of the bar respectively as they both tensed up. "Well, I don't believe you two. You are both terrible liars." Makino crossed her arms, "So spill it." "It's nothing I swear," Delta said quickly while glancing at the floor. "You really are the worst liar I've ever met." Makino face palmed and turned to Luffy next. "Luffy, do you have anything to say? Remember, I'm doing this all for you." She got down on her knees to look straight into the boy's eyes and smiled gently. You know I don't care to be like this, but I can't have someone I don't know going around and pretending to be your brother. You understand, don't you? Well yeah, but that's the thing. You do know him. He's me. Luffy grinned. Luffy no. What are you saying? Delta rushed over to him, we literally just went over this. How could you forget? It was like 30 seconds ago. Oops. Luffy laughed, sorry. Though he sounded suspiciously not sorry. Makino gaped. What are you talking about? She turned to Delta, who froze. What did you tell him? How dare you use his young mind for your own sick benefits? Wait what? Makino, you've got this all wrong. Please, just hear me out. I didn't want to tell anyone about this, but because someone is a complete dumbass, I guess I have to explain. And, please keep an at least slightly open mind before I say anything. This better be good. Makino grumbled. Alright, well first, I'll be blunt. I'm from the future. Yes I know, shocking and unbelievable, but it's true. Sounds crazy, but remember, there are such things as devil fruits and other insane, illogical things in existence, so if you tell me that time travel is impossible, then explain to me how a reverse mountain exists. Delta waited a moment to see if she'd argue. When she did not, he moved on. Alright, secondly, in the future, my name is not actually Delta, but is actually, wait for it, Monkey D. Luffy. Now at this, Makino might have laughed out loud at what the man known as Delta was implying if he had not looked so serious. And the fact that he could crush knives, move faster than the eye could see, and was just terrifyingly strong in general also factored in, but it was mostly the serious face thing. You're insane. Do you really expect me to just believe you're from the future and that you're Luffy, just 20 years older? Not really, but a man can hope, right? And I'm actually 17 years older, but that doesn't particularly matter right now. To get you to believe me, I'm going to tell you a certain few things that I think will get you to trust me and my claims, though I need Luffy to leave first. Can't give him too many spoilers about the future, now can I? Makino turned to Luffy. Luffy, would you go up to your room for a little, please? Me and this man here have to talk and he seems quite adamant about you leaving. But I want to hear the future. Luffy whined. Delta scoffed, Luffy please. I told you I'd answer some of your questions later, but right now, these events are for Makino's ears only. Alright. After a moment of considering, Luffy finally grumbled out, HMPH. Fine. But you owe me, the kid stomped off to his room. Once Luffy was out of earshot, Delta turned back to Makino. So what are these events of the future that you're so sure will make me trust you? She asked. Alright, let me preface this with the fact that I'm going to try and tell you as little as possible, as to not drastically change the timeline by accident, so bear with me. He took a few moments to collect his thoughts before talking again. Makino rolled her eyes during that time. See this hat? Does it maybe remind you of any hat you know? He pulled off his straw hat and passed it to Makino, who looked at it with a mix of curiosity and confusion for what felt like a solid 5 minutes. Trying to speed up the process with a hint, Delta said. Maybe of a certain red-haired man. Suddenly Makino's eyes widened immensely in recognition and she looked up at Delta. Where did you get this? Shanks would never give someone this hat unless she gasped, you Kai. No. 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 No I didn't and no don't say it. Delta repeated quickly, putting a finger to his mouth, and no, I also did not steal it. He actually gave it to me when I was 7. He came to my village and used it as his base camp. Shanks took quite a liking to me and he gave me his hat as a parting gift when he left. This all happened a little over a year from now. Also known as the future. And if you didn't get this, my village is Foosha and the boy he gives the hat to is Luffy, or me. Oh, and I know you've got a thing for Shanks. Makino gasped, but how would I know that, you might ask? Well it's because you told me, but in about 15 years. Delta stopped talking then, but couldn't tell if his words had thoroughly convinced her. She was unreadable. Makino looked at Delta, eyes wide, blushing slightly, and at a complete loss for words. She knew that had to be Shanks' hat, and Shanks would be coming to Foosha soon, but she was also certain that the man was keeping it very hush-hush because the world government was not a big fan of such a strong pirate crew in the weakest sea. The crush thing bothered her because she hadn't told a soul about it. Sure there were some subtle allusions to it, but there was no solid proof. Makino took a deep breath. I have one thing to say to you and one thing only, Delta tensed in anticipation. But she only smiled tentatively and asked, I was just wondering how do Shanks and I turn out? His tenseness eased and Delta grinned happily, which turned to a smirk as he thought about how to answer Makino's question. I think that's a little piece of the future I'll just keep to myself for now. I mean, surprise is the best part of life. Then he sighed, but really, thank you for believing me. I was trying to keep this a secret, but knowing Luffy this would have probably gotten out someday anyway. And on that note, if we could keep this me being from the future stuff to ourselves that would be great. And please watch over little me to not spill any beans. I was quite talkative when I was his age and not very good at keeping secrets. Makino smiled, of course, even I know that about Luffy. And if you really want to keep hidden from exposure, you should hide your hat, considering it would be strange for there to be two of the exact same hat, especially with the importance of who it belongs to. Makino reasoned, but that's just my opinion. And this is a little too much for me right now, so I will see you in the morning. She ruffled the Delta's hair and walked away, leaving him to think in silence. On the one hand, he really wasn't into the idea of getting rid of the hat, but on the other, it made sense in every way besides his sentimentality. Delta growled. He knew there was only one option, and he was not a fan. He stood up and walked out of the bar. He walked down the dark empty streets he knew so well until he reached the beachside. Delta swallowed hard. He walked to the edge of the dock and with trembling hands, removed his hat. And if anyone would ask, the water hitting the hat as Delta looked upon it was a very small rain cloud, nothing more. He took another deep breath and closed his eyes. When they opened again, they were filled with cold resolve. He palmed the hat, crushing it into a ball, and pulled back. Gum gum. Delta began without any ferocity, throw. And he threw the hat as hard and as far as he possibly could. He never saw the landing. It hurt. Without a sound, Delta turned away and made his way back through town and into the bar. He trudged off to bed, hearing the light snoring coming from Luffy's room. He'd undoubtedly fallen asleep during his and Makino's conversation. It was a hard day. The next 27 days passed with little of particular interest occurring, hence why it was skipped story-wise. Still, Delta loved every minute of it. Waking up each morning, he would be treated to a wonderfully delicious breakfast made by Makino herself, who could not stop apologizing for her stupidly awfully terrifying attitude towards him, as she so elegantly put it. Afterwards, the day, though tepid when likened to the Pirate King's alternate life, was a delightful breath of fresh air for the man who had come to know living as being king of the violence in the seas. Delta would walk around town freely with Luffy in tow due to Makino's lifting of his bans, and they would find anything and everything interesting to do, which was, unsurprisingly enough, not much. After getting their fill of whatever it was they were doing, they'd stop for a quick bite of lunch, where quick usually ended up lasting up to an hour. Then they'd head towards the forest, much to Makino's dismay, who was concerned with the forest's rather large selection of dangerous animals, very capable of killing Luffy. Though through a bit of coaxing and whining from the two about how Delta was very strong and could very easily look after Luffy, she begrudgingly accepted. Afternoons spent in the large dense forest outside Foosha were where Delta had decided to begin Luffy's training as a fighter, saying the younger the better, which Luffy had happily accepted. He'd have Luffy work on his strength and speed for the first part, forcing him to do the basic exercises he'd seen Zoro doing on the Sunny, but on a much smaller scale. Then he would teach Luffy the very basics of punching and kicking to go along with his soon-to-be great power, and after hours of very rigorous training, for Luffy, not that the boy seemed to mind, Delta would carry him to dinner, where Luffy would tell Makino all about how strong and awesome he was getting with Delta. Overall, this had been the basic gist of his time spent in the village, but then day 28 happened. Luffy had just completed the day's training, and the pair was resting in the forest when Delta noticed a strange look on Delta's face. "Boy, Del, what's wrong?" Luffy had instigated the nickname Del to call Delta about a week prior, in accordance to Delta's calling Luffy Lu. "Nothing," Delta responded, which was met with an unbelieving frown. After a moment, Delta raised his hands in surrender. Alright, you got me. I was just thinking of how Garp is coming in 2 days, and I'm not so sure I want to meet him, well at least not yet." "Why not?" Luffy asked. "It's just I'm not sure how I should go about explaining why a stranger calling himself his grandson's brother, living with his grandson, and training with his grandson, isn't some weird trick or something. He's very protective of us, meaning it'll be quite the conundrum, and I'll most likely end up fighting him, and I'd like to avoid that mess for at least a little while longer." "That makes sense, I guess." Luffy stood up and stretched. "But why not just tell him the future stuff? It worked pretty good with Makino." "No." Delta stated, "We cannot ever let Garp know the truth about me. Ever. He is one of, if not the last person we would ever want to know, got that?" Luffy's brow furrowed. "But why?" "Because," Delta began with a sigh, "he wants you to be a marine, right?" Luffy nodded. "Well, what do you think would happen if he found out his lovable marine-bound grandson became a pirate in the future?" "No idea." "What would he do?" "First, he'd freak out and you'd be getting fists of love harder than you've ever imagined possible. Then after your thorough beating, he'd probably whisk you off to some military base where you'd spend the rest of your childhood training to be the marine you were never meant to be." Luffy gasped. He wouldn't really do that, would he?" Much to the boy's terror, Delta nodded. "You've never seen Garp angry before. When he gets mad, the little rationality he has goes straight out the window and you're left with an extremely pissy, stubborn old man who will do everything in his power, which is a lot actually, to get what he wants. I promise IW will never tell him, Del. I swear it on my life." "That's good. Problem is, with me around it will be much harder to keep that little secret, so I've been thinking." Delta paused and turned away from the boy, "about leaving Foosha." "What?" No, you can't. You're so cool and I need you to get strong. Luffy sniffled, you can't leave. You don't understand, Lu. I wouldn't be leaving forever, just the 10 days Garp would be here. Luffy's features softened a bit, you'd keep up your training on your own for those days, unless Gramps decides to train you himself, and when he leaves, I'll come back, okay? Okay, but you'd better be back right away once Gramps goes, got it? Luffy ordered sternly. Delta chuckled, wouldn't have it any other way, Lu. The next day, after getting the go-ahead from Makino, Delta set out on a small dark green sailboat he'd borrowed from one of the very kind fishermen in town. Makino had given him a compass, not that he knew how to use it, but she was on the edge concerning her agreement to the trip anyway, so he decided not to bring it up. She'd also packed 10 days worth of dried meat lunchboxes, though because of the monkey family appetite, 10 days worth barely fit on the boat and had to be tightly boxed up and tied down to avoid the food sliding off the side of the craft. After a short goodbye to Makino, Luffy was still sleeping, the man from the future set out to sea in the wee hours of the morning, as to have a lot of time to pass Garp's ship when it was still farther out at sea. For Delta, it was invigorating to be out at sea again. He'd missed the soft calming swing of the boat on the open seas. He'd missed the cool ocean breeze pushing lightly against his skin. He'd missed the quiet tranquility of being isolated out on the sea. But most of all, he'd missed the overwhelming sense of pure freedom the sea brought to him. Sure, the sailboat wasn't the sunny, not by a long shot, but he was content just the same. That is, until he saw a ship in the distance. He couldn't quite make out what type of ship it was at that moment, so he sailed towards it. As he got in closer, Delta first noticed that it was a marine ship, no doubt. The gray and aqua blue of the ship, with a big seagull emblem, gave it away almost instantly. But what really caught Delta's eye was the dog's head carved out on the front, a bone between its gaping jaws, and a bright pink tongue sticking out the bottom. It was the figurehead of a ship Delta would know anywhere, and it was the ship he'd wanted to see the least. Garps. Delta's eyes widened. After only a moment of stunned reaction time, he began his newest and most important mission. Mission Heart to Port. Unfortunately, Delta definitely did not have time to complete this. Just as he began to turn, a cannonball came whizzing past, landing about 10 feet behind him. A warning shot. Delta quit his turn then, and decided to sail straight into the behemoth of a ship Garp was on. Another cannonball blasted towards him, no longer meant for warning. He kicked it back at the ship, though it failed to break the hull. Another. He punched it. Another. And another punch. The booming voice came out of the ship, most certainly the voice of Garp. Why the hell were you just on Dawn Island? I wasn't. Delta fired back. Liar. Drat, he knew. I'm not. R2. I'm not. R2. Another cannonball came rocketing towards him, which Delta promptly smashed with his fist. Excuse me, I was having a conversation. By now, the marine vessel was basically right on top of his dinghy sailboat, but a little to the left. If Delta's sailboat had been big or tall enough, they could have set up gangplanks and charged. Instead, 2 small hook chains came out the side of the ship and grappled Delta's transportation and started to reel him up with astonishing speed. That was the moment when meeting Garp was sealed into his fate. At the end of the reeling, Delta was shown a sight to behold. On deck were about 100 or so Marines all standing at attention on either side of him in set rows. Between the two groups stood Garp in all his glory. The white suit, the small beard, the scar around his eye, it was all there. But he looked younger than Delta remembered. Probably because of the 18-year age difference, but still, it was more unnerving than with Makino. He seemed more agile, more ferocious, and more dangerous. Delta was almost intimidated by his grandpa. Almost. Hello, Delta grinned, waving to the crowd of white and blue-clad Marines. Garp glared, what in the hell were you doing on Dawn Island? I wasn't. Don't you lie to me. Garp growled, my navigators are smart and they could tell by your direction and stuff. How? Delta asked, genuinely curious. How the hell should I know? They're the navigators and besides, you're the one who should be explaining himself. Okay, well you've got me. I was in Foosha. You were in Foosha, Garp shouted and began speed walking up to Delta, fist at the ready. Oh, did I say Foosha? I meant I was in New Ra. Yes, I was in New Ra. Not Foosha. New Ra. That's where I was, heh. At that moment, it is said you could hear a facepalm so loud and so intense it could be heard for miles and miles around, created by over 100 soldiers simultaneously. Garp did not look amused with that response. Not even a little. A vein bulged out in his forehead and he made an attempt at knocking Delta's head off, which was still in the sailboat hanging over the ocean. Delta, in a moment of panic, dodged the incoming fist by backing up, which caused him to lose his balance, leading Delta to fall into the sea. It was cold. Very cold. That was Delta's first thought as he plunged headfirst into the sea. The next thought was, I'm drowning. And the next, more sobering thought was I am going to die in East Blue. What a pathetic way to go. Then Delta blacked out. 00000. Delta woke up sputtering. He looked around. He was back on Garp's ship, chained at the wrists and ankles to a bolted-down chair on the deck. The chains were sea prism stone, that was bad. He sighed internally. Ugh, he grumbled aloud. Vice Admiral Garp, the prisoner is awake. A voice stated very serious-like. Delta didn't bother to look over, it was just one of Gramps' little marine lackeys. Prisoner? Delta asked, still looking around the ship, but I did nothing wrong, other than be on the wrong island. I don't have even a single beelie down for my arrest. The marine didn't answer. Instead, Delta heard loud footsteps coming over to him from behind. Delta turned as much as he was able to. It was Garp. When the man stood firmly in front of Delta, glare blazing, he spoke. You're not a prisoner, brat. I just didn't know what to call you. I was thinking maybe a detained person on my ship that I have a very bad feeling about, but that just didn't have a nice ring to it. And why would you have a bad feeling about me? Delta inquired thoughtfully. I've done nothing wrong, other than make a small eye as to where I'd come from. But that's exactly why I have a bad feeling about you. Garp responded, eyeing the weakened man in front of him. Why would someone lie about where they were coming from? Especially a place as unassuming as Dawn Island or Foosha. Maybe because an insane old vice admiral started throwing cannonballs at me out of nowhere, solely because of the fact of where I could have been. I don't know, it sounds pretty reasonable to me. Delta answered snidely. Shut it, brat. Garp bellowed, then in a much lighter tone began, but that's the problem. I don't think that's why you were hiding it so adamantly. I think there's something going on that you want hidden from us, or me specifically, if it's what I'm thinking. And considering you left the day before I was supposed to arrive anyway makes me lean a little to that I might be right. Dang. When did Garp get so perceptive? I have no idea what you're talking about, Vice Admiral Garp. Delta said, eyeing the ground while sweating profusely. You're lying, boy. And you're bad at it. Garp said. I'm not. Delta yelled. R2. Garp yelled back louder. I'm not. Delta yelled back even louder. R2. Garp roared even louder. I'm not. Delta practically screamed. R2, now shut it. Garp said, ending the battle of voices that was becoming deafening to the other Marines. You're lying and we both know it. Now tell me, who are you? Delta sighed. The power of love was just too strong, but he was not going to give out just yet. The Wanderer. What kind of bullcrap answer is that? The only answer you'll get, Monkey D. Garp, grandfather of Monkey D. Luffy and father of Monkey D. Oh wait. I shouldn't add that last one, now should I? Delta smirked. If he had to go down, it was to be as an awesome mystery person. He had never been like that in his past life and really wanted to try something new for a change. To say Garp was at a loss for words would have been an understatement. He literally gaped. After a moment though, he seemed to catch his entirely stupid face and shut his mouth, pulling his glare back up. Boy, you know things you really shouldn't. Now who are you? Delta stared directly into Garp's eyes, neither daring to break eye contact nor make a sound. It was a battle of power that Delta knew he was going to lose. He was tied to a chair with sea prism binds. He was at a loss. He couldn't say the truth. No, never. Even if Garp didn't believe him, and honestly he probably wouldn't, Garp might actually kill him. And that was another thing Delta wanted to avoid at all costs, so there was only one sensible thing left to do, at least in Delta's eyes. He had to lie. He had to make up a good lie and go with it. It was the only way. Mustering all the raw lying power he could, he thought of a lie. It wasn't a good one, no. But it wasn't the worst one, either. Keeping the most normal unlying face he could manage, knowing that messing up this lie meant probable death and or a terrible life for the little Luffy, Delta spoke. I'm Makino's husband. A moment passed. Then another. Then another. You could probably cut the tension with a knife, as the saying goes, and then another moment passed. And then, Garp answered, you're what? I'm Makino's husband. Delta repeated with a little more confidence. We married recently, but she wasn't sure you'd approve of me being near Luffy, who I assure you thinks I'm awesome, and here we are. Garp studied the man for a bit. Then he said, bullshit. Delta started panicking. Apparently Garp wasn't as stupid as he remembered. But he couldn't let Luffy fall into the hands of. Garp burst out laughing, boy, you look hilarious. Sorry about that, but I just had to see your face. Bwahahaha. Delta couldn't read the situation. Was he screwed? What had happened? What? Sorry brat, I just had to see the face of Makino's husband under stress of death. And I must say, you took it quite well. What did you say your name was? Garp wiped a tear from his eye, probably from laughing too hard. Delta? Well Delta, welcome to the family. You are quite the mystery, but now the whole knowing my family thing makes a hell of a lot more sense. Makino sure trusts you, doesn't she? We never keep secrets from each other. Oh, and sorry about the chains, we just didn't know who you were. Garp looked at the Marines, men. Get me the key to these things right now. This man is not our enemy. The man with a very troubled look came from the crowd of Marine uniforms and began undoing the shackles keeping Delta in place. As the final click of his left ankle chain fell to the floor, Delta stood up. Immediately his strength came surging back into his body and he felt like he could crush a buster call just for fun. But with none in sight, he stretched. So, if you don't mind me asking, what's your devil fruit? Don't see many of them around in East Blue. Garp sounded lighthearted, but there was an undertone of quiet suspicion. It doesn't really matter, does it? Quick to change the topic he asked, so where do you keep the meat in this place? Garp laughed, seemingly forgetting the topic of Delta's devil fruit. Makino sure picked a good one, got his damn priorities straight. Now come on, follow me. He walked off towards one of the doors to where Delta could only assume was the kitchen. Delta ran over to catch up with him. Now about the name Delta. 00000. Delta and Garp were sitting out on the deck on beach chairs by the dog head, watching the sea in all its stillness, only moving in light waves as the ship sailed through. It was calming, peaceful, a feeling Delta had never before experienced while within arm's reach of Garp, but for some reason he seemed deep in thought, which was always a bad sign when it came to Garp. Say Lucy, about Makino. Garp had decided earlier Delta was too hard for him to say, so he decided to call Delta Lucy instead. Why Lucy, you ask? Because I thought that part of the Dressrosa arc was hilarious and it will never get old. Delta had no problems with it, so why should you? Anyways, oh no, he's figured me out. I'm screwed. When did you meet her? Oh good. He is still an idiot. About 18 years ago, but I only really came back into her life around a month ago. He paused, waiting for Garp to say something, but he seemed deep in thought, so Delta continued, she didn't particularly trust me at first. Garp grumbled in agreement, but that was mostly because she didn't recognize me from before. I mean, I was just a kid back then. Appearances change. And she thought I'd died. So what made her know it was you? Well, she didn't really at first, but I told her a few things that only I would know, and she had a change of heart. He seemed satisfied with the answer. So only seen her a month, eh? Garp said after a moment. Yep. The marriage must have been recent. But it was. Very recent. But Luffy seemed alright with it. Delta had trouble keeping a straight face. Oh, how is Luffy, by the way? On the road to the Marines. Choosing to ignore the second part, Delta answered, oh good. A complete and total dumbus, but good. Wahahaha. You got that right. Says he wants to be a pirate, but he'll learn. Even if I have to force it out of him. He then mumbled something unintelligible under his breath. All Delta heard was something about rice crackers and Marines. The pair sat in silence for a few more minutes, watching the sea and sky and thinking. Then Garp stood up, told Delta or Lucy that they'd be landing in Foosha in a little over 3 hours. Delta didn't nap much, but lying really tired him out, and this string of lies was no exception. 00000. The ship docked a little outside Foosha near some craggy boulders that dropped off over the cliff. The sun was setting, making the light source more and more inconvenient. When it had all been settled, Delta was the first off the ship. Once he touched land, he broke out in a wild sprint to Foosha, which was stopped abruptly by a randomly pissed off Garp. But as Delta turned around, Garp's strange anger disappeared as quickly as it had sprung. Come on Lucy. I know you want to go see your sweet Makino, but please, come with us. This forest could be dangerous. Hey. I can handle myself. Delta shouted. I'm sure you can, Garp started, but stay with us please, if only to keep this old man's mind from wandering to some dark places. Okay. That was really the only thing Delta could say. He couldn't run. He wouldn't fight Garp. He was helpless and it sucked. The pair walked through the forest in an uncomfortable silence for the next mile. The other Marines were ordered to stay by the ship, the trip was a family thing, and they were only there by order of Sengoku. The forest was quiet at night. Everything was either asleep or getting ready to do so. The only sounds were some faraway owls and bugs, along with Garp and Delta's footsteps crunching on dried leaves and twigs. The two reached Foosha with no real incident. The town looked nice, but neither man smiled. There was a tension between them that Delta was not happy about. Garp was hiding something. In the back of Delta's mind he felt the marriage thing didn't actually convince Garp, but he chose to ignore it in place of Garp being a ninja, which he was slowly getting more and more sure about. We're here. Garp said. Great. Delta responded. Can't wait to see Makino and Luffy. I'm sure they'll be surprised. Of course. You weren't supposed to be here, were you? The question was stated more as fact, and I wasn't supposed to be here till morning. I bet they'll be happy. Real happy. Their conversation somehow got them to the doors of Party's bar. The outside lights were still out, but inside, behind the shades, a light still shone, inviting the two in. Garp went for the door. I'll go first, if you don't mind. Sure. Makino looked up from the counter she was washing. Sorry, the bar's closed Garp. Garp smiled, pulling the door open and embracing Makino in a hug. Hey Makino, we caught your husband on his way out, sorry you thought I wouldn't like him. Wah. Delta quickly caught her mid-sentence, hey Makino. Yep, I got caught. Haha. Makino looked over at Delta for a split second before realizing what was happening. She was always smart that way. Oh Delta, you silly boy. She said cutely. It annoyed Delta how good at lying she was. Rubbing it in his face like that, who did she think she was? Yeah. Sorry. Delta said awkwardly. Garp smiled at the two. Look at you two lovebirds. How sweet. He was silent for a moment while Makino and Delta exchanged confused glances. Then he said with a start, well now that lie is over with, let's have a chat. What? Makino and Delta yelled. You knew Delta was flabbergasted. Makino was less of that. She probably knew right away. She was just yelling surprisedly to help Delta's ego. It annoyed Delta. Well now then, take a seat, both of you. I insist. Garp said politely. Too politely. Well any polite was too polite with Garp, but that was beside the point. Well now take a seat, both of you. I insist. Garp said politely. Too politely. Well, any polite was too polite with Garp, but that was beside the point. Now. The SSSSHHH, Delta waved his hand in dismissal, I'm not lying. What in the world are you talking about? I am 100% married to Makino. Makino frowned, Delta, please. I don't think. I am super married. To Makino. My wife. Who I love. Because we're married. Yes. Delta, really this is. In love 100%. Garp looked at Delta as if embarrassed for him, Lucy, please. Listen to Makino. What you're doing well boy, it's just sad. Delta looked around nervously. It's all over for Luffy. He's going to Marine camp. Wait, more like murder camp. His life is over. My life is over. No. Who am I kidding? I'm the goddamn pirate king. I'm not gonna lose to Gramps. I will defeat the power of love. I will defeat the ninja. He then sighed. Fine. You got me. I'm not married to Makino. And why? I'm actually the ghost of her dead brother, Minino. For 2 seconds, Garp just stared at Delta, neither moving. Then Delta fell to the ground after being punched in the gut. Not that he hadn't seen the fist coming, but he felt that he may have deserved it. Lucy, will you please be seated? Garp gestured to the 2 chairs opposite him, let's have a talk. Delta failed to point out that he was already seated. Seated on the ground. Delta instead grasped a chair and pulled himself up. Seeing Makino was already sitting, he hesitantly sat opposite her, right next to Garp. So, Makino started, how has it been, Garp? Ignoring Makino, Garp studied Delta intensely, as if looking for some fatal flaw that would give him reason to bash his brains in. Luckily for Delta, he did not seem successful in his search. Passing a quick glance to Makino, he said gruffly, you know Lucy, the only reason I didn't leave you to sink when you fell in the ocean earlier was because there were so many Marines around. Wouldn't have looked too good if I got reported to Sengoku. That guy's a real stickler for rules, you know. Makino glanced at Delta worriedly, and Delta mouthed later. He turned back to Garp, at least you have your priorities in check. Meh, I don't really care what you think, boy, Garp said. Then, the only reason I kept you alive after we'd brought you on board was that little conversation we had about my family. I wasn't sure who you'd gotten the information from or if it was a solo effort, so I waited to see where you'd go, what you'd do. Garp, he's not a bad guy. Makino pleaded, he's just strange, that's all. Boy. Delta huffed. Makino shot him a sorry glance. Garp made the smallest of grins, wait a second, Makino. I appreciate your opinion and I'm getting to that. Anyways, when Lucy told me he was married to Makino, that set off a bunch of red flags. Makino's not a particularly well-known figure around the world, meaning the only reason Lucy'd know her'd be if he was in direct contact with Luffy. How perceptive. Delta murmured, slightly surprised. You know, boy, I didn't get where I am today from brute strength alone. I can think a thing or two if need be. So shut your mouth before I shut it for you. Delta shut his mouth. Good. So when I learned this, I decided to bring you to Makino to see how she'd react to you. You see, I trust her absolutely, so when she went along with your lie to save your sorry ass, it made me think. So here we are. Delta raised an eyebrow. Garp stayed silent. So? Makino and Delta finally asked in sync. So what? Garp seemed genuinely puzzled. So if you trust her and she trusts me, why are we here? Delta specified. Ah yes. You see, I understand that for one reason or another you can't tell me who you are, which makes me want to break your face. Sure. Makes sense. Garp twisted a bit in his seat, but it seems that I will not be doing that anytime soon. So I'm asking, what is the real situation here? Are you staying in Foosha? Leaving? What? Makino began, he'll be staying here with me until further notice. No ruckus causing, I'll make sure of that. She sent a stern glare to Delta, who shivered. Garp sighed, about as much as I was expecting. Well Lucy, it seems for the time being, you're joining our little family. I'm not particularly excited about it, but for now, I'll go with Makino on this. Thank you. Delta said. Shut it Lucy. I don't like you and I don't know what you're hiding from me, and that makes me like you even less. He gave a very menacing glare, so remember this, if Makino ever comes to me with a single doubt about your trustworthiness, I will crush you. You can try, Delta intoned, not particularly knowing where that came from. Garp narrowed his eyes. Please, Makino pleaded. I'm just saying that you're kind of old, I'm not, and, well. Garp scowled. His body tensed and his fists balled up. He ready to stand. Boy, you don't know what you're talking about. Delta shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. I just hope we have a doctor ready during our fight in case there are some steep stairs and you hurt your back. Garp's eyes gleamed. His face reddened. I am going to. Gramps. Luffy came running into the bar and jumped into a hug. Oh, how the days of actually enjoying Gramps' visits had been. So bright. So innocent. I thought you were coming in tomorrow. Immediately, Garp cooled down. His fists unclenched, his muscles relaxed under his white suit. A grin replaced his scowl. He pulled his beefy arms into the hug, squeezing Luffy and seemingly forgetting the burning hatred he had felt towards Delta just moments earlier. Sorry about that, Luffy. We were a little ahead of schedule. That okay? Yeah. Luffy grinned, I haven't seen you in years. Actually, it had only been a couple months, but nobody bothered to correct him. Luffy's eyes then wandered over to We found him in a little dingy on our way here and picked him up. Garp said without much enthusiasm. Picked me up. Right. Cool. Luffy laughed, I thought I was gonna have to train by myself for the next 10 days. Garp raised an eyebrow, train. Luffy turned to Garp after a moment of staring infatuatedly at Delta. Yep. He's training me to be an awesome pirate. Shush. What? Garp bellowed in rage, his temper flaring again. Luffy, why did you say that? Delta yelled, now Garp's gonna try and kill me. This is exactly like what happened with Makino. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Sorry. Luffy, we are going to have a long talk when Delta was cut off as Garp's fist made contact with his face, sending him flying through the wooden wall of Makino's bar. Ow. That's for teaching my grandson to be a no-good pirate. The old man sprinted towards Delta with surprising speed, fist raised, and this is for me just not liking you? He swung, hitting nothing but air as Delta swung himself out of the way. Let me explain. Delta yelled, dodging yet another raging fist. Whatever you have to say, do it now. Garp yelled angrily, throwing another punch as they both ignored Luffy's incessant cheering from the bar. I'm not training Luffy to be a pirate. Delta lied quickly, I'm just training him to get stronger. I see potential in Hyup. He threw himself onto the ground to avoid Garp's solid black foot. That's bullcrap. No, it's true. He just wants to be a pirate really bad. I promise, I've tried explaining to him that pirates are pure evil, but he just won't listen. Too close for comfort, he thought as another fist came bounding past his face, just past his nose. This not attacking or using my devil fruit or using any awesome ability strategy is hard. Garp stopped punching for a moment, thinking about what Delta had just said. Delta hoped that Garp would just believe him, but felt that that would be too good to be true. That is, until Luffy yelled, don't tell him that. Now he's gonna be mad at me, and I'm gonna get so many fists of love. And that did the trick. Garp turned to his grandson, fire in his eyes. You lied to me, you little brat. Luffy gulped and quickly shook his head no before promptly running away. Get back here. I'm gonna teach you a lesson in wasting my time. Garp shouted, running back to the bar and jumping through the delta-shaped hole in the wall. Delta sighed in relief. Thank you, Luffy. You really pulled through. He looked at Makino, who was still standing by the hole in the wall. I think that went well. Makino just smiled. She pointed at the gaping hole. Her smile turned sinister. I'll fix that tomorrow. Don't worry. The sinister smile faded and she walked to her room, presumably to go to bed, and ignored the yelling and punching coming from somewhere else in the bar. That is the end, so thanks for watching. Comment down below with recommendations on what fanfic I should do next. And remember to like and subscribe to my channel.